For our text today, we will read from St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 12, beginning with verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an-hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. As we noted last time, the Pharisees were angry with Jesus because his disciples were picking and eating corn on the Sabbath. Jesus knew that the Pharisees would take note of this and raise objections. These Sabbath confrontations were divine appointments and occasions when Jesus could teach and do the things that would confront their false religion and demonstrate what the king and his kingdom were really like. They were also designed to show the world at large what God wanted from man and what true holiness sounded like in word and looked like in action. Now, this is not to say that these situations were staged and unreal. That is not the case. The disciples really were hungry, and there happened to be a cornfield along the road to the synagogue. Still, in his sovereignty, God arranged these situations for specific purposes. Well, it's the same with us today. Our lives unfold in a real and normal way as we go to town, go to school, go to work, go to play, go to worship, or whatever we do. But everything is arranged in the supralapsarian, foreknown world of God's sovereignty to bring about his will in our lives and glory to his name. So it was with the Christ and these conflicts with the Pharisees about the meaning of the Sabbath and how it is honored and kept holy. In verse 3, Jesus replies to their angry accusations. Have ye not read what David did when he was an-hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God, and did eat the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests? Well, what is the point Jesus is making here? Is it to degrade and downplay the prophetic importance of the seventh day? No, it is not. In fact, these conflicts over the Sabbath are to both define what the perfect Sabbath really is and how it is honored. In Jerusalem, at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus tells and shows the Jews that the true Sabbath consists in ceasing from the dead works of man and working the righteous works of God. The works of man are self-serving. The works of God involve self-denial and service of others. But this service of others must be true charity. Now, you may want to ask if I do not mean to say love, not charity. My response is no, I do not mean to say love, I mean to say charity. Dr. John Whitcomb, who co-authored The Genesis Flood with Dr. Henry Morris, was a professor of Greek at Grace Theological Seminary in Winona Lake, Indiana, the School of the Grace Brethren, a denomination to which I once belonged. In the 1960s, I heard him give a discourse on the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, using, as all truly reverent and enlightened professors do, the King James text. When he came to the verse about having charity, someone raised the question as to whether or not love was a better word. Dr. Whitcomb's reply was this: well, let's think about that for a moment. Let me throw out a word to you. The word is love. What comes to your mind when I use the word love? What does that make you think of? Now, let me throw out another word. The word is charity. What does that make you think of? What comes to your mind when I use the word charity? And that is what this Greek word in this passage means. It means giving with no thought of getting in return. Cutesy pastors and teachers who are trying to project the image of being relevant like to substitute the word love for the word charity without really knowing the issue. The word is charity, at least the one I want to use here, and I am sticking with it. Love can mean anything from foolish sentiment to lust, but charity can only mean one thing. So let me repeat. The works of men are self-serving. The works of God involve self-denial and service of others, but this service of others must be true charity. In this passage, Jesus continues that lesson, but from a bit of a different angle. Remember that Jesus lived and taught under the covenant of law, and it was incumbent upon him not to break the law. Picking and eating corn on the Sabbath lacked the philanthropic character of healing a crippled man. So what was it that justified their doing that in this instance? In his reply, Jesus tells them this: David was on a mission from God. His life was on the line. God directed him to the temple and to the high priest Ahimelech. David asked Ahimelech to give him the showbread, and after some conjecture, Ahimelech did it. Ahimelech, although he was discovered and was killed by Saul for his actions, was not wrong in what he did. Why not? Well, simply because the Sabbath was about the contrast between the works of men and the works of God. David was not doing the works of men, he was doing the works of God. The salvation of the world depended on David not dying of starvation or becoming so weak he could not escape Saul. So giving David the showbread was exactly in keeping with the spirit of the Sabbath. If David had come to the temple and the high priest tired and hungry after hunting wild boar in the mountains, it would not have been justified, and the high priest would not have given him the bread. But David, the anointed of God, was doing God's work, and that was what the Sabbath and the showbread were really about. Here is how Hebrews 4 puts it, with just a bit of paraphrasing. From verse 9, there remaineth therefore a Sabbath, a seventh to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest has done so by ceasing from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest of God, typified by the Sabbath day, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. I do not think you should have much trouble making the application. Jesus was on the most important mission for God this world has ever seen. His life was the fulfillment of the many-faceted testimony and meaning of the Sabbath. Like David, when Jesus was anointed as God's king and sent out to wrest the kingdom away from the impostor, he had given up on the works of man. We saw that in the wilderness temptations. With David, it was not a perfect thing, and he often crossed over and went back to the old ways of Adam, but Jesus never did. Therefore, anything Jesus did was about ceasing from the works of man and entering into the rest of God. As with David, the cornfield and the corn were sanctified by the mission Jesus was on. All right, that works for Jesus, but what about his disciples? Yes, Jesus says, they are included in the policy. Have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? Then Jesus cites another Old Testament incident to direct their thinking. It is not just an accumulation of evidence. This has something unique to add. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. In this case history, Jesus tells them that the temple, its service, and its maintenance are about the work of God as contrasted to the works of man, and it is so important that service in it takes precedence over and supersedes the rules of the world outside. Why? Because again, it is a matter of the works of God and not the works of men being done. Why? Because again, it's a matter of the works of God, not the works of man being done. And it is in that which the Sabbath from the seventh day of the existence of the heavens and the earth consisted. The temple was built and its service ordained to represent the presence and the works of God in the midst of, but not a part of, the fallen world of Adam around it. The earthly temple and its service was not the righteous work of God, and it did not work out that way in the end, but it represented it, and it was typical of it. In that prophetic and messianic testimony, God allowed for the priest to do that which was not lawful for others to do, and to be blameless in the process. The temple justified the work of God that went on inside of it. In type, at least, those who were serving the temple and doing the works of God could not be guilty of wrong, even though they did that which was forbidden by the law for other men to do. In this, Jesus was facing them with something that they already knew about, believed, and with which they agreed. The priests and the Levites could profane the temple by violating the rules that others could not, because of the office that they held, but more particularly where they served, the temple of the holy God. In prophetic witness, at least, nothing wrong could be done by God's men in God's house. Now, again, the law failed because it was weak through the flesh, and the priests and the Levites became vile and evil men who corrupted the temple, and that corruption resulted in his being thrown to the ground, as Jesus told them that it would be, and as it has been in the past. Even so, the testimony and the type of the shadow held, and the Jews knew and agreed with it. Now Jesus tells them that a much greater than Solomon's temple, or any rebuilding of it, is here among them. As he told them earlier in John 2, he was the temple of God, of whom the earthly temple and tabernacle were only types. The temple, at least in type, was a house in which a holy man would do holy works for the sake of and in the presence of the holy God. If that were indeed the case, then anything done in that temple by that holy servant of God would be in keeping of, not in violation of, the spirit of the Sabbath. And perhaps the sons of Levi could not keep the law of God, but the prophets said that the Lord would suddenly come to his temple. This was not a reference to the temple of Solomon or any earthly temple made with the hands of men. It was a reference to the incarnation of God in the person of Christ. The Christ, or the Messiah in the Hebrew term, would be perfect and would come to do the will of God. Jesus said this messianically of himself in Psalm 40, verses 6 through 8, repeated in Hebrews 10, verses 5 through 9, which I will cite here. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body thou hast prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. Above, when he said, Sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offerings for sin, thou wouldest not, neither hast pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. Now this the book of Hebrews says on the heels of having already said in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest, who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, and not man. These passages deserve, perhaps need, commentary, but we're not going to give it here. In John chapter 2, verses 18 through 21, then answered the Jews and said unto him, What sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in the building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. Jesus is telling them that he is the righteous servant of Isaiah 53:11, and that he is the dwelling place of God in this earth. But the Jews did not understand. All they could see was that Jesus and his disciples were in the cornfield on the Sabbath, and that was a no-no. Jesus chides them for their lack of knowledge. His patience is wearing thin with them. He does not get angry with them here, but he will soon. In verse 7, but if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, he tells them, you would not have condemned the guiltless. So they did not know what that meant. Do we? All right then, what does it mean? How does having mercy and not sacrifice relate to men picking corn on the Sabbath? Well, it gets back again to what the spirit of the Sabbath is, what it was that God wanted from men when he blessed and sanctified the seventh day in Genesis 2:2, and why he later on commanded that men hallow it and keep it holy. Now, I apologize if I'm being a bit tedious here, my friends, but this is a pitifully misunderstood and vitally important matter about which comparatively little that is enlightened by the Holy Ghost has been spoken or written. The law of God, Jesus and his apostles have told us, is fulfilled in this: ye shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, many things are comprehended in that, but when all is said and done, rightly understood and carried out, this is the perfection of which the seventh is a symbolic, prophetic type, as we just read in Hebrews 4, and the rest from false and carnal works into which God wants us to enter. If the Pharisees had understood Hosea 6:6, which Jesus here quotes, they would have known that the Christ was doing service to God by showing mercy to men. It was never the ultimate desire of God, according to Hebrews 10, verses 5 through 7, that sacrifices be made. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body thou hast prepared me. In burnt offerings and offerings for sin thou hast no pleasure. Then said I, lo, I come, in the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. They were only prophetic types, these sacrifices and offerings, of the coming Christ. What God wanted from the beginning was man in a body worshiping God and serving his fellow man out of a heart of dedication and love to both God and man. If the Pharisees had understood that, they would have commended Jesus for what he was doing as the incarnate God and the Christ, instead of poking sticks at him and his disciples for picking a few ears of corn when they were hungry. They would have blessed that cornfield for its contribution to the most important ministry of the most important man in the history of the world. But they did not, and so they did not. In a parallel passage in Mark 2, verse 27, Jesus told them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. God put you in this earth that he had made and prepared for you, and gave you this Sabbath for your good, Jesus is by way of saying to them, and you have made yourselves slaves to it. Instead of using it righteously with knowledge and integrity, you have locked it around your neck like a slave chain. In verse 8, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. Don't you know that the Christ, the incarnate God, is Lord over the Sabbath that he gave to men for their good? And the same is true of you, if you understand, and your actions are holy. Do you really think that God has made the Sabbath your Lord and Master? What a great discourse on the meaning of the Sabbath and how it is honored. But it did not get past the skin on their red and angry faces. They still planned to kill him for embarrassing them and branding their ritualistic worship as meaningless. One might have thought that Jesus would give up on them, but he did not. He left them there in the middle of the road, alongside the cornfield, mumbling, shaking their pious heads in resentment and dissent, and made straight for the synagogue to continue this confrontation over the Sabbath and its meaning. We will join that action there in the synagogue next week, if the Lord is willing.
Read more at godspointofview.com. A copy of this book is available from Amazon in Kindle and paperback format. Link in the description.